Welcome, everyone. My name is Tony Quayle. I am the president of the Rhone Rangers organization, also general manager for Thatcher Winery here in Paso Robles. I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. We appreciate you all attending and here to listen to us talk about some Grenache. It is International Grenache Week, so what a perfect time to talk about some Grenache. We got some great people, great winemakers joining us this evening, and we have Jeff Kralik, our moderator for this evening, who has a great blog where he talks about wine and a little bit of cycling, just a tiny bit, but also on all the formats, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, he'll be under the moniker of Drunken Cyclist. So welcome, Jeff.
Thanks. Thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here. Just a little bit of background on me. I'm in lovely downtown Houston. The sun is actually out today after Hurricane Nicholas came through the last couple of days. We were relatively unscathed. We lost a little bit of a tree, but not power, which is good. So yeah, I started enjoying wine a long time ago. As I was a cyclist, I was a cycle tour guide in Europe. And one of the regions we went through was the Rhone Valley, and that's where I first started really my love for Grenache. As most of you know, it comes from the Southern Rhone and Châteauneuf-du-Pape, and really one of my favorite wine regions and one of my favorite varieties. So I'm really honored to be here to lead this discussion.
Excellent. So I'll have you jump in and introduce our panelists.
Yeah, we're going to start with Stephen Searle, who's the winemaker at TH Estates in Paso Robles.
Jaffurs.
Oh, I got it wrong. Look, I've already screwed up. You should fire me right away. I knew we were going to start with Jaffurs. So Stephen Searle is the winemaker at Jaffurs. I think you've been there since around 2012. Is that right, Stephen?
I have, yeah. I've been making the wines since 2017.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about the estate? I know Craig has some slides to throw up there about Jaffurs, and why don't you take the floor there?
Yeah, so Jaffurs, we're located in downtown Santa Barbara, the winery and tasting room, and we work with vineyards all throughout the county. So we don't have an estate vineyard. We work in about 8 different sites throughout Santa Barbara County. All of our contracts are acre contracts, so we control the farming, and they're long-term contracts. We have a lot of continuity in all the sites that we work with, and keep the same blocks and rows from year to year for the most part. And Jaffurs started in '94. Craig Jaffurs started the winery up in Santa Maria, working at a co-op facility, where a lot of wineries start around here, called Central Coast Wine Services. And then after about 6 or 7 years, he moved down to Santa Barbara, and so we've been in downtown Santa Barbara ever since. I started with the winery in 2012 as the assistant winemaker, and when Craig retired, he actually sold to another family, Dan and Janelle Green, and then I took over winemaking in 2017.
Okay, great. Our second panelist is Varinder Sahi from Copio Vineyards and Winery in Paso Robles. Varinder, why don't you take it away, and Craig will throw up the slides that you sent.
Sure, thanks, Jeff. My name is Varinder Sahi. I'm an owner winemaker along with my wife, Anita Sahi at Copia. We are a 50-acre estate on the west side of Paso Robles in Willow Creek District. We planted over a vineyard in 2019. Around 20 acres are planted. And this year, we're going to get our first estate fruit. But meanwhile, for the last 4 years, we've been sourcing throughout Willow Creek, Adelaida, and Paso Robles, but also some cool climate grapes from both Edna Valley as well as Santa Rita Hills. And this particular Grenache we source from Jespersen, which is northwest of Edna Valley, only 4 miles from the Pacific. And this so very cool climate, morning fog, evening or afternoon ocean breezes, very cool and long growing season in this particular vineyard. So
great. Last we have Phil, and Phil, it's a French name, so I just assume I speak a little bit of French, so I just assumed I knew how to pronounce it. But is it LaMontagne or is it LaMontagne?
LaMontagne.
Okay, so you went with the French pronunciation there, which gives you instant street cred with me. So Phil, you're with TH Estates, which stands for Terry Hogue, former defensive back for the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm a big Eagles fan, so I had to get that in there at some point. So why don't you go ahead and take the floor? You're down in Paso Robles.
Yeah, we're in Paso Robles, the Willow Creek district. We're on the east side, kind of a spade when you look at the actual map of the districts of Paso Robles. That's right here. You kind of see the star. It's a really awesome little valley. We're kind of protected from a lot of different components in Paso. It's makes life really easy with regards to farming. There's a shot of kind of what we grow, some Grenache, Mourvedre, Syrah, and then a little bit of kind of some Rhone whites there. We added a little bit of Viognier as well this last year that we'll be looking forward to in a couple of years. I've been here since 2015. I started as an intern. In 2016, I was kind of the sous chef of the winemaking for that harvest. And then by 2017, was in charge of the winemaking with Terry and Jen Consulting.
Okay, great. I just wanted to give a shout out to our viewers. Thanks for all of you being here. I see some of you have already taken advantage of the chat function in the bottom of the Zoom. And if you want to just give us a quick shout out where you are and maybe what's in your glass tonight as we start to taste through some of the wines. I'm going to start with the Jaffurs, the Grenache. And I have a few questions for the panelists in general, and then I have some questions specifically about each winery. So my first question is about Grenache itself. A lot of the French call it the Pinot of the South. It has a really great capacity to express nuances and the peculiarities of the terroir. Do you guys agree with that? And I know two of you produce Pinot as well, and maybe you want to touch on some of the similarities and differences between the two grapes. Stephen, do you want to start?
Yeah, well, first of all, I certainly do agree that Grenache shows its terroir really well and differs a lot depending on where it's planted. Even the Grenache, the two vineyards that I work with for Grenache, they're only a couple miles apart from each other, and they're wildly different in flavor and texture and color and across the board, really. And region by region, it's, you know, in Santa Barbara, the Grenache that we make tends to be a little bit lighter, almost Pinot Noir-esque. So that kind of comes back to that. And, you know, all over the world, the Grenache is a little bit different from place to place. And in Spain, they're making big brooding dark Grenache. But in any case, yeah, so to your question about the similarities between Grenache and Pinot, I think on the vine and the way that the grapes grow, they're actually quite different. Pinot Noir is a much smaller cluster, much smaller berries. The ripening season is a lot different. Pinot Noir is a cool climate varietal, whereas Grenache does quite well with a little bit of heat, and some cases quite likes it. But at least with the Grenache that I make, it almost has Pinot Noir-like characteristics. It's a little bit more red fruit driven than dark fruit. And we work really hard at Jaffurs to sort of embrace that style of it too. It's also a little more spice driven. It's a little fuller than Pinot, and clearly is, you know, has different flavors and different textures. But I make a lot of Syrah at Jaffurs, and I actually think that the Pinot or the Grenache is actually a little more Pinot-esque than it is similar to the Syrah that we make.
Yeah, so I was looking at this in the glass, and it's a pretty fairly translucent, pretty light in the glass, as you mentioned, as well as those red berries on the palate or on the nose. How is your terroir, do you think, dictating that, or is that more of a winemaking decision that you the way you farm the fruit?
Well, I think it's both. In this region, Grenache tends to express itself as a little bit more of a lighter to medium-bodied wine, and so, you know, we get it from two different vineyards. They're both in Ballard Canyon area of Santa Barbara County, which is kind of right in the middle of the Santa Ynez Valley. So it's a little bit east of Santa Rita Hills, which is all Pinot and Chardonnay. So it's a little bit warmer than that area, and it's almost all planted to Rhone varietals. They do really well there. So you still get that ocean influence, particularly in the mornings and the afternoons. And you get the breezes coming through there, and it cools down in the morning. You still get the morning fogs, but there's a little bit more heat and sunshine during the day. So Rhone grapes do exceptionally well out there. And yeah, the Grenache at Stoltman tends to be really pretty, really floral, almost like strawberry-esque in the flavors, a little bit of spice, really light in color. And then Rhone Vineyard is the other site for Grenache for us, and that tends to be a bit darker, more raspberry, kind of a liqueur-esque type character. And so then we end up, and that's a little more tannic as well at Rhone, and we blend those together to make more of a complete wine.
So Varinder, you mentioned that you were recently or still in the process of planting your vineyard, and it looks like you're going pretty heavy in Grenache. What was the decision behind that? And why don't you talk a little about your wine's a little bit, I think a little bit spicier perhaps than the Jaffurs, certainly a little darker in both the nose and in the palate. Why don't you talk to us about your Grenache style and why you decided to go pretty heavy on the Grenache?
Sure. First of all, I agree with the panelists because Grenache does change with the terroir. And in my experience, and I've last few years, I've been making a lot of Grenache from cool climate as well as Paso, Robles, Willow Creek, and Adelaide. And I find Grenache coming from cool climate is a lot more aromatic as compared to what we have here, and a little bit lighter on the color side. We decided to plant a lot of Grenache because we believe Southern Rhone blends, the story begins with Grenache, and it is literally Grenache goes through all of our blends. We start with the Grenache heavy blend, which we call the story, because that's what we believe that the Grenache is the main sort of base of these Southern Rhone blends. And so we planted around 5 acres of Grenache and almost 5 acres of Syrah. We are very passionate about Syrah too, but I think Grenache, not only Grenache itself, but the GSM plays a very important role. It is, in my experience, it is much more temperament grape to ferment. It can get out of your hand pretty quickly while you're making it. So you have to be on top of winemaking. But Grenache overall, I think Rhone blends are not complete without Grenache.
And so Phil, down there at TH Estates, you guys are pretty much 50-50 Syrah and Grenache. Is that safe to say? I mean, looking at your blends and the wines that you produce?
Ultimately, we have more Syrah planted, but Grenache fruits much more than Syrah. It is a very giving, variety that way. So we have it planted kind of up the hillside. We actually picked some hotter pockets of the vineyard to pop the Grenache in because it does do well with that as long as you're kind of managing canopy well out in the vineyard. You can see some beautiful Grenache from some hotter pockets on the site.
So what do you think about Grenache versus Pinot? Because I know you guys do a little Pinot down there at TH Estate as well under a different label, but how do you feel the two compare or contrast?
I think it is a very, very good comparison. Not only there's some farming similarities. Yeah, they fruit very differently, but Grenache is prone to bleaching during some heat. So you have to watch out for that as well. It kind of comes into play with that canopy management. So you kind of have to, watch your heat. I know I said kind of warmer pockets, but you do have to be careful with that. And Grenache can also, in my mind, carry a decent amount of tannin. And so when you have that bleached out component and that decent amount of tannin, it's kind of like equivalent to Pinot on a really seedy year. So I do think you have to be really careful with your fermentation management. You have to be very intentional about understanding the Grenache you're bringing in, very much so like a Pinot, and make the wine based off of what you're seeing come in. You can't have any kind of predisposition as to what you want to do. You really have to kind of read Grenache that's coming in.
So why don't you talk a little bit more about that bleaching? What does that mean, and how can you prevent it, or is it just something inevitable that happens?
So you're going to have a hotter side of the vine, western side. If you have it planted that way, you can also plant. We've got several plantings that kind of use the growth, the vegetative growth, the canopy to shade and kind of give some dappled light to the Grenache. You need light because light, those kind of that light, a little bit of dappled light gives you color. But too much direct sun gives you too much heat, and then you actually start to lose the pigment on there. We'll see it on the western side of where fruit gets exposed to direct sunlight. You lose some of that color, and color is an important component when it comes to the rest of your tannin management, because colors bind to a lot of harsher tannins. So it starts to form those polymeric pigments, and while that's nice for long running color, it's also nice for kind of textural and bitter, kind of staving off any bitter or anything like that as well. So color can be an important factor with Grenache, just like I think it can with Pinot. You can use same techniques. Like I like to use a lot of whole berry on years. So if I'm a little worried about color, I might slow where I'm extracting stuff from. I might extract more from the skins, from the pulp, and less from the seeds itself by the end of the fermentation.
Wow. Okay, cool. So Stephen, while we were still on your wine, why don't you talk a little bit about it? You said you get it from 2 different sites. Is it a blend of both of those sites, or do you keep them separate and make a vineyard designated or anything like that with your Grenache?
No, we just make one Grenache each year, and it's a blend of usually. Recently, it's been 2 vineyards, both in Ballard Canyon, like I mentioned. I'm sorry, what was the other part to your question?
Well, so do you see your Grenache program expanding at all, or I know you're pretty much dominated by Syrah, a little bit of Pinot thrown there.
It's funny because this year was the first year we've made 2 Grenaches, and when I say this year, 2020. So it's still in barrel. We bottled the Santa Barbara County Grenache, and we held 3 barrels back from Rhone Vineyard because it was just a really standout year for Grenache. And we held back 3 barrels that we're going to bottle as a single vineyard Rhone Grenache probably this coming spring. But I don't foresee our program expanding necessarily. But so I mean, we still made the same amount of Grenache overall. We just kind of cut out a little bit of the blend to make a single vineyard. And then I just remember what you asked before. We do make the wine separately. They ferment separately, they're picked separately, they're aged in barrel separately, and then we blend it just before we bottle.
Okay, Varinder, moving on to yours, the story. I guess, I mean, I don't want to sound, what's the story behind the story is a little too easy. That's kind of cheap, but I'll go with that. So why don't you give us a little bit of background on the story?
Sure, let's talk about this wine first. Jespersen Vineyard is, as it said, thank you. It is a very, it has a long, usually growing season, but in 2018, it was particularly, very long growing season. We picked this particular Grenache on November 5th. It was our last pick. And so it came around 26 bricks. It was around 4 tons of fruit. And it was almost perfect. We do bleed off around 10 to 12% we did 2.5 tons in stainless steel and 550 gallon tank. We did one 48-inch bin, 1 ton, and did a 1/2 ton in a puncheon. As far as fermentation is concerned, took around 15 to 20 days for different to get it dry. It was barrel aged around 20 months or so, and 45% new oak. Yeah, it got pretty decent color. For us, as I said before, the Grenache is our base, and our story always begins with Grenache. We are picking our first Grenache from our estate vineyard coming Monday. We could have picked it tomorrow, but looking at the weekend is a little cooler, so we said, okay, we're going to take it to Monday. But Grenache, the story, I love this particular vintage because the long hang time really was able to give us a very, very decent phenolic ripeness that you don't usually get in Grenache, and I hope it's tasting good.
Oh, it's wonderful. So I have a couple questions there. So you're relatively new to this game, right? I mean, this is your first foray. So my first question is, this is your first vintage of your own estate fruit. How excited are you about that? That's got to be overwhelming.
It is overwhelming. We just picked up our Grenache, Searle last week, and it's fermenting, and it is, it's a long time making. So we took this property in 2017. We came to Paso for the first time in 2015 as a part of UC Davis, where I was taking winemaking certification, and truly fell in love with this area. Before that, I was trying to make a small amount of wine just as a hobbyist in Lodi, and where we have a vineyard, family vineyard, but I never thought the winemaking will be a career, or it was just for fun. Came here, totally fell in love with this area, and especially winemaking community. And one of the winery we visited that time was Booker, and we asked Eric Jensen if he can come back as interns, and we had to twist some arms. And then 2016, myself and my wife Anita Sahi, we became his interns, and we never left. And we turned our lives 180 degrees and said, this is where we want to be. It took us a year to find this property, and now first time we're seeing that fruits of the labor and the wait is just it's amazing. I can't explain in words how it feels.
So great, and I want to touch on Eric Jensen just a little bit. I did an interview with him a couple days ago, and what was that like being? So you said you went to UC Davis, and Eric Jensen didn't, as far as he's ever told me, he doesn't have any formal viticultural or enology background, but you had so did you ever say, what about if you do this? Or were you still kind of like, I'm an intern, I better shut up and do my work?
Yeah, the first time we met Eric, it's very interesting because when we came to Paso, I think it was part of 9 different wineries we went to. And every winery, it was totally different. Red carpet sort of treatment for the future winemakers or the students. And we come to Booker, no wine, nothing. And first thing he said, education is overrated. and we decided to come back and taste his wines and become his interns. And very interestingly, it is what my insight is that he does not have any formal winemaking education, but he uses the most cutting edge tools and technology and analysis in winemaking. He's always in the forefront of technology when it comes to use it. He's not, of course, he's a master winemaker. He understands, but he always uses technology, and we learned that from him that it's important to use that. Along with your taste as well as experience. If there is a technology to use, especially in the analysis, understanding when to press, for example, for a Grenache, when to press Grenache. Grenache can get out of your hand if you wait too long and you over extract tannins. And I've been making now for 5 years, and every year I think we got it, and next year Mother Nature throws another monkey wrench. So
I have to challenge you on one thing though. I can't believe that Eric Jensen just said education is overrated. It must have been much more colorful and a little bit more long-winded than that. So one last thing, and then we'll move on to Phil. You said you bleed off a little bit of your Grenache. Is that what goes into your rosé program, or what do you do with that juice? And talk a little bit about your rosé from Grenache.
Yes, we do mostly our rosé is Grenache driven. It is right now it is our Senior style, so bleed off from Grenache. In future, I planted around 600 wines specifically for rosé, which is Moedra. So my future plan is to have a bleed off Grenache and then have direct press of Moedra and then blend them to make a rosé. But right now what we do is we try to stay around 70% Grenache that is bleed off, and some Moet and some Syrah for color.
Okay, to the two other guys, Stephen and Phil, I know you guys, I know Phil, you have a Pinot Rosé again on that other brand there at TH Estates. And Stephen, I didn't see much Rosé on your website. Maybe I missed it. Do you guys have any thoughts about making a Grenache Rosé? I've talked to many people that think that it makes the best Rosé, even better than Pinot Noir, which seems to be really prevalent. But with the Rosé market kind of taking off in the US, and it doesn't seem to have plateaued yet, which many people had predicted. Do you guys see moving into a bigger rosé program at all?
You know, we've discussed making rosé. If we were to make it, it very likely could be from Grenache, but we just haven't seen the need to be honest. You're right, it's really popular. We'd probably sell it just fine, but we, you know, for one thing, we make wine in a really small space in downtown Santa Barbara, and we're just kind of limited in terms of what we can do. And we max out around 5,000 to 6,000 cases. And for us, rosé just isn't a priority right now. You know, we don't bleed juice from our Grenache, so we don't have that saignée to do it. So we would, you know, if we were to do it, we'd probably pick it for rosé, and it's not something we're really looking to get in at the moment.
And probably since you source all your fruit, that's that fruit that you do source is kind of you're looking for a specific thing for the stuff that you do right now, right? I mean, Vernder mentioned that he's planning some for rosé, and that you guys just
yeah. I mean, if we were to make it, we'd go out and find a different source to do it from. I mean, honestly, where we get our Grenache from right now, it wouldn't make economic sense to
right.
pick it for rosé.
Right.
But I'm not saying it's. I mean, Jaffurs has made a rosé in the past when 1 or 2 vintages when it made sense. One year I know it was a second crop from a Syrah pick. This was even before my time at the winery, but the guys at that time went through the vineyards through the vineyard. And dropped the second crop in one of our Syrah blocks, and it was actually really nice fruit to make rosé with, so they kept it and made a couple barrels of rosé. So if the opportunity were to arise, I'm not saying it's impossible that we wouldn't do it, but it's really just not in our plans at the moment.
And Phil, I know you guys make a Pinot Noir rosé. Any thoughts on making a Rhone variety, Rhone varietal rosé?
So we do. We just sell through it like the last 2 years. As soon as you release it, it's been gone. So, and kind of similar to Stephen's predicament, we make wine in a pretty small space, and so the quantity of rosé that I can make is limited. But I love Grenache-based rosé. Also enjoy popping a little bit of Mourvèdre in there, and we actually sneak a little bit of Pinot over, as sacrilegious as that might be, into that rosé as well, because the Pinot and the Grenache play well for a rosé.
And I have to say that's pretty rare. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that, because Pinot in particular, I mean, Grenache is kind of blended all the time, but Pinot rarely do you see blended with other grapes. As winemakers, why is that? Is it just because Pinot fruit is so expensive? You want to highlight that? Why doesn't Pinot blend more often into wines?
It's got to be a historical thing. I mean, I can just picture all of the French winemakers spinning in their graves if I were to take like a full blooded Pinot and blend it with something else. Even though it does happen, it's just not talked about too often. In Pinot, it's so particular site to site, and so varied and just so unique. You can have 2 properties next door to each other that produce, very different fruit. To cover those nuances up by adding something else to it would be tough. The only way I could see Pinot going into something else, if you wanted to maybe like bump the acid, drop the alcohol, something along those lines.
So talk a little bit then about, because you guys do a lot of blends between Syrah and Grenache. What does Grenache bring to that blend, and how does it help out Syrah and vice versa?
So in my mind, out of the trinity of Grenache, Syrah, Mourvèdre, Grenache is like that like fun, flirtatious. It's the life of the party. It's got acid. It's got all these bright characters. It's got floral notes. It's got spice. It just really lifts everything. And it's kind of like, it'd be the varietal at the party that all the other varietals want to hang out and talk to. And so it's just a ton of fun that way. Where Syrah, I think like Syrah is like a workhorse. It handles business in a blend. It lays a base. It provides like these real depth to the wines that it goes into. And so they work together because one's like the show and one's kind of like the actual working horse on the pair. And in my mind, Mourvedre steps in on that. I know you didn't mention that, but Mourvedre steps in as a bridge between the two. It kind of shares some characteristics with Grenache, some characteristics with Syrah, and kind of makes the whole unit cohesive.
So this is open to all of you. So as you know, in the Rhone, it's primarily blends in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, which is dominant. It has to be 50% Grenache, but there's 13 other or 12 other varieties that can be included. But in the US, typically we see varietal specific wines. Why do you think that the US, is it the market that dictates that? Is it, why don't we see more blends where Grenache plays a part, but not for example, Copia, you have 97% Grenache and 3% Syrah. So what is it that is different about either your winemaking styles or about the US market that takes Grenache in that direction?
I think, as Phil was saying, Grenache is something that, is such a versatile varietal that it can complete, if there's something missing in Syrah, it can bring in that part, and especially being more tannic than Syrah, and it can bring the mid palate sometimes. So it can fill in the blanks in a very small amount of Grenache, can lift the other varietals very well. I mean, of course, in Paso, we have independence in that way that we can do. And one of the most important and most fun part for me as a winemaker is blending. And it takes a long time, but I think that's where you can try different things. And we don't ever have a notion what we're gonna do, but always I find that Grenache always finds its place in different blends. And it's nothing forced, it's just taste and having blind tastings. And if it, and Grenache is always lifting other blends and other varietals up. And I have started seeing, which even people have started blending a little bit of Grenache in Cabernet. And it happens in Spain all the time, but I have started to see that in Paso Robles as well.
So Stephen, what do you think? I mean, this is, I looked online, but I couldn't get the exact varietal makeup of, is it 100% Grenache, your Grenache?
Yeah, this is 100% Grenache. I mentioned earlier, we're at Jaffurs, we really do try to embrace the more elegant side of Grenache with this wine. And I could easily blend in 10% Syrah and it would darken it up a little bit and give it a little more tannin. But that's just not what we're going for this wine. I age it all in neutral oak and bottle it a little bit on the earlier side too. So it spends 10 months in barrel as opposed to closer to 2 years for some of our other wines. I do a lot of whole cluster stem inclusion with it, which kind of brings out the spice in the wine, all in an effort to make kind of more of an elegant styled wine.
So will you keep some of the Grenache aside to help with your Syrahs? Is that something?
We make 6 different Syrahs, and one of them, the Santa Barbara County, which is made to be more approachable when it's first released, will usually blend anywhere from 5 to 8% Grenache, because it does kind of lift the aromatics a little bit, brightens it up a little bit. But with all of the single vineyard Syrahs, no, we don't use Grenache in the blends.
And Phil, you guys kind of of the 3 on the panel, you are the more serious. That's not a judgment, just a nod. you have more blends. You're more committed to the blend. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and I think when I started here, the host had kind of had it set up, and it was really like a you pan over from Grenache to Syrah essentially, with like Mourvèdre as a bridge in between. I'm a little more free flowing with it these days, and I'm really looking to try to accentuate, different varieties with different ones, and also accentuate different expressions that we can create here from the estate, whether it be really aromatic driven, lighter, prettier, or kind of lay into it. And that has to do a little bit also with vintage to vintage.
Okay, why don't we, well, I'm gonna move on to the TH Vineyards, TH Estates Grenache. And Phil, it'd be great if you talk a little bit about the wine. And also, I think I mentioned to you guys earlier in the week that I've been cyber stalking you a little bit. Stephen, I couldn't find LinkedIn page for you, so you might have to work on that, because if someone's going to stalk you, you need a little bit more out there to stalk. But Phil has quite the so you have an interesting story. If I remember correctly, you started as a tasting room person, and then kind of worked up to tasting room manager, and then I think you took some classes on the side, and then started getting into winemaking. How did that decision process come along as you talk a little bit about your wine?
Okay, I'll start with the wine real quick, so that way everyone has a notion of what's in the glass in Vernder. My good neighbor there, Varinder, was able to trade bottles. By the way, really enjoy this wine. And I meant to ask you, sorry for the aside, but meant to ask you, the punch in, did you do some whole cluster in the punch in, or you do just like, yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
I was kind of my guess, like a little bit of whole cluster in there, a little bit of the spice.
That's right.
Perfect segue. I love using that same technique. If I'm pulling it off at a good time of year, I'm seeing some good phenolic ripeness, I will definitely pop some heads on punch-ins, 500 liter punch-ins, do some whole cluster ferments in those, press that off, and I have that lot to play with in terms of blending. And then I do the rest of our fermentations. It's all small lot fermentation, so about 1.5 tons in 48 S's. And so, yeah, kind of a similar plan of attack. I have been picking Grenache here since I started a little on the earlier side, but I have learned that you really just have to pay attention to the phenolic ripeness. You can't I can't push in Paso to try to make a 14 even alcohol Grenache. It's just, we're in Paso, so it's got to stay true to the climate here and true to how Grenache kind of matures here in Paso. So I'll pick this at varying sugar levels. Really, I'm just more so looking at phenolic ripeness and acid, because we have amazing acid retention here in Paso. To kind of go back to an earlier component, we have this awesome, huge amount of limestone in the soil, very high pH, which leads to some great acid retention on the wines. We also have these huge diurnal shifts. This last week we were kind of experiencing it. It didn't dip down as much as I'd like to see, but we can hit over 100 and drop down to the 50s that night.
Wow.
And so that huge swing helps us retain acids at night, because if you stay warm at night, you can metabolize some of those very precious acids on the wine. And so, yeah, we weight the acid out on it. So that's the behind the wine. And if I haven't rambled too long, I can.
No, well, I have another question about the wine.
Okay.
It's called Skins, which unfortunately Terry Hogue didn't just play for the Eagles. He also played for one of our fierce rivals, now called the Washington Football Club, but it once called the Redskins. So now that Washington is changing their name, are you thinking about changing the name of the wine, or is it going to?
That is a very good point. I don't see it changing, but but that is as soon as you start mentioning it, I'm like, that's right. That is no longer the reference across. The colors have shifted on the labels over the years, but the colors did coincide to football teams that Terry actually played for. So this was originally that color, the Kelly green for the 46 for his time at the Eagles. And I could go through them all, but yeah, I'll bring it up. I'll ask Terry for sure. I don't expect him hopping to make any changes on it, but I will definitely bring that up. I like that.
So a little bit about your background and how you got in. You started. You're from the region originally, right? You're from the Central Coast.
Yeah, I moved up to Paso in '93. My grandparents bought property on Willow Creek District. So I rode the school bus around the whole Willow Creek loop. That is now a very amazing spot. Feels like a little hometown district feel to me because of that. I used to run around the hills and play with friends on all of these spots that are now these awesome, amazing vineyard sites. So I had no initial plan on going to the wine industry. I actually went to school initially for mechanical engineering and then took the lifelong student path after I realized I wasn't gonna be building crazy machines, and started doing music theory. I took drama classes, philosophy classes, writing classes, anything and everything that would not ever lead to me getting a degree. So I quit school, much to the chagrin of my highly educated family, and was bartending and playing music locally, and that paid the bills. And I actually helped open a tasting room here in Paso, met the winemakers, and they made it look really, really easy. And they were both Cal Poly grads, so I hopped back into Cal Poly and was fortunate enough to land a spot in the front of the house at Denner, which gave me access to all kinds of awesome winemakers at Denner at the time, and was working production here in 2015. That was my first harvest here as an intern.
Cool. And you mentioned music, and I mentioned also your LinkedIn page. Your first entry on your LinkedIn page, I don't know if you realize this, I don't know how often any of us look at our own LinkedIn pages, but it's musician. It's not winemaker at TH Estates, it's musician. So what do you still play? And are you is there a big circuit in Paso that you play, or what's the story there?
I had a circuit going, not intentionally. Literally, like every gig I played, someone would come up to me and ask me if I could go and play at their place, and it just kind of turned into a thing. And for a while, when I was back in school, I was playing 5-6 days a week, multiple times a day in some instances. Because fortunately, what wasn't here when I moved here in '93, all these wineries and restaurants have brought in pretty awesome music scene for musicians. You can make a legitimate living up here going and playing music, which is something that you could not say, years ago. So an amazing kind of turn here. I don't do as much now. I have a 3-year-old daughter and a 5-month-old son. So
wow.
my free time that way is I still do play. My wife actually plays music as well. And so we'll do that. We've got a little family jam area that we're setting up as well. But not as often for the regular gigging.
So that's a segue over to Stephen, who is not a local. I saw that he's originally from Boston. Is that correct? And
no, I grew up in Northern California, but I went to college in Boston to study music, actually.
Yeah. What's your music background, and how have you been able to keep that up, or are you in a similar boat to Phil that time is of the essence and something's got to go?
Yeah, I mean, music was kind of my first love, and that's what I went to study originally in Boston after high school. And while I was out there, I worked at some really terrific restaurants with some great wine programs, and I decided to totally shift focus and do winemaking instead. And then that's how I ended up out here. I also went to Cal Poly. I ended up transferring to Cal Poly and graduated from there with a viticulture degree. But yeah, I still play. I'm more of a noodler these days than a serious player, though.
Well, I'm kind of depressed that you guys both just mentioned Cal Poly, because my son, he's a freshman in college, and we visited Cal Poly, and I was very excited. I love San Luis Obispo, and I was trying to push him in that direction, but he ended up in Cleveland, Ohio, which, yeah, not a great reason to visit out there, which I figured out is probably the reason he went there. So Varinder, let me transfer over to you. So you're a transplant as well. I think if I remember, Varinder, your background, you're from Chicago. That's where you and your wife met? Is that correct? How did you?
That's where we met. She's born and raised in Chicago, and I lived most of my life in Indianapolis, at least 20 years of my life in Indianapolis. And go Colts, man! I'm a big Colts fan. So so we are from Midwest, and we never thought California was yeah, we have some family in California. We had some property, but we never thought, we're gonna end up living here permanent. And I thought even when we started this Copia project, I said, I'm just gonna come for the harvest and we'll be back. Yeah, but here 2 years down the road, we realized that you can't get away. Winemaking is not only harvest, it's a year-long process. You have to stay on top of it. So yeah, now we are here permanently. I was born in India though, myself. I was born in India. I never had wine till I was 24, 25 years old. And I'm trained as an engineer. And it was those corporate dinners when I was a young engineer that I had no idea what I was drinking, but I was drinking amazing wines and those dinners, which corporate America was paying for. And I realized that I loved those beverages. And it was that's where my love of wine started. And my wife, her background is restaurants, and she spent 8 years in New York in some big restaurants. She managed Tribeca Grill, Nobu, and that's where her love of wine started. And something that was common between us when we met in 2015 was wine. And now that's all we do.
So one more question for you, Varinder, before we have some questions from the audience here, but can you hold up, it's your right arm? You got a bit of ink on there. Where did the ink come in the process? Was that in Indianapolis?
This is all COVID in California.
So you're becoming a true Californian by getting all inked up.
Yes.
So we had a question about the smoke tank. I think it's from Walter. I don't know where Walter is. I don't know if he chimed in that. He says, read a lot about the fires in California. How are you dealing with smoke taint? Is it a big issue in Paso and Santa Barbara? So we talked about this a little bit before we came on air, but does anyone want to handle that one or jump into the smoke taint issue?
I think last year there was a big scare. We did have a lot of smoke that came from all kind of different fires, and luckily most of us escaped. There were I did around 20 lots last year. There was one lot that was it was a moderator lot that I did find some smoke taint, and we kind of ended up blending it away. But it is, I think last year there was a lot of vineyards here were affected, and some of them got blended away, and some of them didn't make it to the final wine.
Because you guys are all small producers, right? Stephen, you said you're about 5,000 cases. I think TH Estates I saw was about 2,500 cases, and Vernder, you're about 1,500, I think. Yes. Ballpark. So smoke taint, that could be a big issue if a large percentage of your wine is smoke taint. Is that right?
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it certainly could be. I've been lucky so far to not have to deal with it down here in Santa Barbara. We had a little bit of a scare in 2017. There was a fire just outside of Santa Maria. And I get a lot of grapes from Vineyard Vineyard, and the fire actually came right up to, I'd go look at my blocks at Vineyard, and there's the vineyard road that you drive in. On one side are my vines, and on one side is charred ground. And that year, I ended up picking a bunch of samples and sending it out to the lab to look at smoke taint. And luckily, it wasn't affected. I think just for whatever reason, probably the way the winds were going. It was also a little bit early in the season where the fruit hadn't gone through veraison yet. So it's a little tougher at that point and not as susceptible to smoke taint. But other than that, I haven't had to deal with it. And knock on wood, will.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, Phil,
I remember when I did send all those samples out and I was waiting for the results, I asked a winemaker friend of mine who I knew had experience working with smoke taint up in Northern California, and I said, how do you deal with that? What did you do? And he said, well, if you can, just don't take the fruit. There's not much you can't really make good wine out of smoke taint and grapes, unfortunately.
So Phil, what's that similar experience that you've had down there in Paso?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're situated kind of in the center of where things were blowing in. So we were pretty fortunate. We also kind of only saw one lot out of everything that we had some smoke taint on. In my mind, it came in early. And so, the first things that color up on season for us here are Mourvèdre and Syrah. So those are the two kind of like potential danger lots. Because you need the waxy cuticle on the grape to form. It acts as like sticky paper for aromatics that are passing by. And so in some cases, you started to see some stuff color up early. It was like that pocket of the vineyard that first kind of came online that gave us a little trouble. But even then, it was very, very mild. And so we were pretty fortunate.
We had another comment from Bev. Again, I should know I should be following this a little more closely. But Bev asked about the acidity. And tasting through these three wines, which are all lovely, by the way, don't get a lot of tannins on the back end. There's plenty of acidity. So what kind of aging potential do you think these wines have? I know in the US, the yarn is the average age that a bottle is, amount of time that a bottle is aged is 2 hours, the time to get it from the liquor store home. But what do you guys think about it? Jaffurs and TH Estates probably have a little bit longer history than Copia, but what do you see in the aging potential of your wines? And is that important to you?
For me, it is. I drink a lot of older Jaffurs wines, and I'm always pretty amazed at how the Grenache ages. Because it's not a tannic wine. There is some dusty tannin like on the back that you get, but it's it doesn't hit you in the face. The acidity does help the wine age, and there's like Phil was saying, down here in Santa Barbara, we too maintain really nice acids in our wines across the board, but particularly from these Grenache vineyards. I will say that the Grenache develops really obviously, and it's really fun to watch. So I just drank a club member actually brought in an 09 Grenache, the tasting room, just a few days ago, and I tried it, and it was super together, really nice. But I love the way that you can see the wine over time change, whereas Syrah tends to, it's a little bit more of a monolith than Grenache is, I guess.
I think
we have a few more. Did anybody else want to? I'm sorry, didn't mean to
no,
cut you off.
That's fine. I was just going to add on to that. The aging, you get that bright fruit that moves pretty quickly to more dried fruits. Potpourri replaces that. Yeah, Grenache is a big transfer from youth to as it ages, I guess.
Okay, so a couple quick hitters here from Facebook. I'm trying to, my son is upstairs, so he can't help me with navigating all this technology. So Varinder, do you distribute any of your 2018 The Story in Los Angeles is a question. That's kind of a quick hitter there.
Not a whole lot. We do, we're mostly direct to consumers, but we do some events in LA that, to promote our wines. In fact, we're doing one in I think 2 weeks from now, September 23rd. But yeah, mostly we are DTC.
Okay, another question. They're coming in fast and furious now. The pandemic. So I've been we've been doing a lot of these Zoom things, and I know I have. And I found that a lot of, kind of surprising, at least to me, a lot of producers actually have had this last year one of the more profitable years for a lot of different reasons, which is kind of under the radar kind of comment. But how has the pandemic hit you guys? I mean, you guys are, Vernder, you're maybe a little bit more involved in the front of the house. The other two guys are more back making their concoctions. So what do you guys think? How has it impacted you, if at all?
For us, it was because we were sort of ramping up our production. And in fact, last year was for us to sort of go out and, make the impact. And we did a visit to New York and Chicago to get placement in some particular restaurants, so that Anita has worked in the past, and then pandemic happened. We got the orders, but we couldn't ship it because they were all closed, and we thought that was good for our brand to be exposed. So overall, but I think at the same time there've been a huge local support, and when I say local, it's within 3 hours driving. LA, as San Diego to the Bay Area. I think that we've been also been blessed that we've been having huge traffic, and it's been overall been okay. I mean, it was we have a very skeleton staff, and we wanted to make sure everybody stays on board, and we maintain everybody on board. And but for a new brand, it was tough to grow, but we maintained where we were. And I know a lot of brands who are in business for a long time, they did see a growth.
Yeah, the Hogue's being established for a while. We saw one of our best years ever last year because it kind of gave us the ability. I mean, we're small. The entire team is 5 members. That covers the shipping, the wine club, the day-to-day tastings, the vineyard, the cellar, and anything else in between. And so it gave us the chance to kind of repurpose, retool, and find ways that we've wanted to connect with people. Because of Terry's football career, we have hot spots kind of around the country, and we found ways of really engaging people in those places. And honestly, for me, it was a chance to put voices and faces to club members that we have, like to actually connect on a more small basis like this and do these kinds of things.
Stephen, did you have anything to add? Or you?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it wasn't catastrophic by any means. It obviously wasn't ideal. We do a decent amount of wholesale, probably about, especially on our bigger lots. We make our Santa Barbara County Searle, we make 1,500 cases of, and some of that goes direct, but almost the vast majority of it is shipped all throughout the country, and that took a pretty big hit. But we also have a really loyal and strong wine club, so our direct to consumer sales went up quite a bit because people are home and they want their wine. So we actually did really, really well on that end, and then took a hit from the wholesale, and it sort of evened itself out, and it didn't affect us too badly.
I think one thing to know that these guys will all probably testify to is that where I've really seen big hits on this is coming this year in like supply chain delays. Trying to get a hold of anything, bottles, labels, winery equipment. I mean, stuff that breaks over the off time. It is a very long wait. I've gotten a single barrel in so far for harvest this year with no sign of when any other barrels will be coming in. So it's those kinds of delays at this point are kind of pretty rough.
And I
see. So go ahead, Varinder.
I want to add on to Phil's and the cost of some of the stuff because of the hiccups in the supply chain, especially glass. It has gone up considerably. That's impacting all of us. And then, of course, delay in barrel deliveries is not helping us.
So I see Tony pop back up. So we must be close to the witching hour. There are a few more questions in the queue. I don't know what you guys, if you guys want to hang around a little longer. We didn't really talk about this beforehand, but Tony, since we see your smiling face, did you want to join in?
If you guys want to keep answering questions, we can go for a few more minutes. We got a few that popped up here. Is it great?
Yeah. So one of the questions that I had for you guys earlier is that this comes from Ryan. When it comes to Grenache, I'm curious to know who the panelists think are producing the best or most interesting wines. I kind of phrase it like, is there some really killer Grenache fruit out there that you guys would love to get a hold of, or is there a region that's about to explode with Grenache? Maybe Washington or Southern Oregon. I know Craig Campa is here from one of the leading producers in Southern Oregon. Any thoughts on that? Where are the hot spots for Grenache now, or killer producers out there that you guys really love drinking their wines?
Well, there's a couple. There's obviously several here in Paso that are very enjoyable. The two I have that I'll mention are two far ends of the spectrum. I do love Justin Smith's Rocket Block. It is very potent, very punchy, but in a very fun way. And the other end of the spectrum for me, I really enjoy the Grenaches that Paul Lotto puts out. And really, if I were to go hunting, maybe this is like a grass is greener on the other side thing, but I would be really interested in hunting for some Grenache planted in Santa Rita Hills in some sandy soil.
I agree with that. I had chance to make some Grenache in 2019 from a sandy soil vineyard called Christie and Weiss. Unfortunately, the yield was so low that we got only a ton or so, even though we had an acre contract. But that's something that I would like to explore again. And the berries were so small and so concentrated. It was almost they didn't look like normal Grenache. And I had to question, I said, you sure this is Grenache? So, but Paul Lotto and Washington State, there are a lot of amazing wines, of course, Powerline by K. Wittners, those are some good Grenaches on the lighter side.
Stephen, do you want to add into that? Are you guys still always looking for new Grenache, or are you kind of dialed in with what you have?
We're always open to new stuff, yeah, for sure. But I mean, we are also pretty, we're pretty locked into what we get at the moment. But yeah, I mean, I've worked with Grenache from Santa Rita Hills, and it's really cool. It's actually it's funny, it's a little darker than the stuff that I get in the warmer areas of Santa Barbara County. I've worked with Grenache at Biennacido, which is really cool. I'd like to make a shout out to Tribute to Grace here in Santa Barbara County. They're making some really nice single vineyard Grenaches throughout this area. I like Grenache from Walla Walla a lot up in Washington. And then obviously,
I think I have one more question about virtual tasting. How do you guys feel about this virtual tasting thing? Are they here to stay? Do you enjoy them? I mean, obviously, well, maybe not obviously. To me, at least, it's more enjoyable to see people face to face. But I think I read about something today. I don't know if this is the next best thing, but it's another thing, right? I mean, what do you guys think about the virtual tasting?
We were planning on doing it before the pandemic hit for club members on the East Coast, specifically for during releases, because we wanted to be able to get wines to people, kind of sit down, have them be able to try the wines, because the way our club is structured, people get to select the wines that they want. And that way, we can get wines in front of people, make sure they're getting wines that they're most excited about, and just kind of give them a chance to do it. So I think it'll stay a component. We've altered stuff. We do like a blind tasting kit. We have a few other kits that we have in the works as well that we've had good success with.
Yeah, I would second that. It's we didn't have any plans to start doing this, but it really has opened our eyes to how well it allows us to connect with club members that aren't local. And I think people really appreciate it. And it's a way to get in touch with people who have been in the wine club for a long time, but aren't able to take advantage of the events that we have or the winemaker dinners that we have out here. So it's been really good in that respect.
What we found very interesting is a lot of our club members being small business owners, and they bring in 10 or 12 of their clients and do sort of corporate virtual tastings or the family virtual tastings, where the family is scattered throughout US, and then they get together and do virtual tasting with us. I think that's a lot of fun. That's here to stay.
Great. And I just have one more question, and this kind of a particular, but it comes from a person named Jonathan Heller, who used to be one of my students back when I was a high school student. I don't know if it's that Jonathan Heller. I mean, it's a pretty common name, I guess. But he wants to know, are there favorite places to hang and sip wines in Tin City, Paso Robles, and Funktown, Santa Barbara. Do you guys have favorite watering holes that you will show up on a given night and either pour some of your own wines or order off the list?
I think you meant the Funk Zone in Santa Barbara, but it's close.
He said Funktown, so I'm just I tried to get my son to go to Santa Barbara too. You see Santa Barbara, but he didn't have none of that either. So I don't know enough about that town.
You can never go wrong with Tin City. There's so many good winemakers and amazing wine tasting rooms. Any one of them, I think, if a chance, I'll hang out.
Some of my favorite spots in Santa Barbara, there's a place called Satellite. It's not in the Funk Zone, but it's up on State Street. And they do a lot of really cool wines. They have a great wine list of, some local stuff from smaller producers and international wines. So yeah, I could give them a little shout out.
Along with my music playing, my hopping out and perusing wine list places has greatly slowed down with kids. So I don't make it out too often. I will second Varinder and go. I typically, if I'm going to go somewhere, it'll be Tin City. It's just like so many different people and a pick your poison kind of a place, and so many different kind of ideas and things happening down there that you kind of get when you put together a bunch of winemakers in a small area.
So I think I hit all the questions. If I missed anything, I'm sorry for those who are joining in with us. Again, thanks so much for joining in. And I toss it back over to Tony, and Craig's there too. So he's looking pretty serious. So he might have something to say. I'm not sure.
Jeff, thank you. We really appreciate you taking the time tonight and taking the reins on talking about Grenache. Varinder, Phil, Stephen, thank you guys. I know this is go time, and we know you guys are super busy, so we really appreciate you guys taking the time to talk about Grenache.
I haven't picked anything yet, by the way.
No.
Talking about I'm getting Viognier on Fridays. I'll be my first.
Nothing in the south is ready yet.
Yeah, Santa Barbara.
But you're thinking about it.
Up in Paso. So thank you all, and thank you everybody who attended this evening. We really appreciate it. Keep an eye out. We are going to be doing another virtual experience in December. We're going to take a break, let these winemakers get through harvest, make sure they get these wines to bed, and then we'll start these back up again. So thank you all again. We appreciate it, and have a great night. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.